He revolutionized the guitar, inspired millions, and redefined rock itself. Yet behind Eddie Van Halen's infectious grin and mind-bending solos lay rivalries few ever knew about. There were 6 guitarists he admired, competed with, and at times couldn't stand. What drove this hidden tension between legends? And why did some of rock's greatest names end up on Eddie's secret list? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the feuds, the slights, and the complicated truths behind the man who changed guitar forever. These aren't just stories of bitterness. They're stories of pride, passion, and what it costs to be the best. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll see Eddie Van Halen in a way you never have before. Let's count them down. These are the 6 guitarists Eddie Van Halen had the most complicated feelings about, and why it mattered. Number 6, Eric Clapton. Before Eruption. Before the screaming crowds. Before the cover of every guitar magazine in America. A teenage Eddie Van Halen was sitting in his Pasadena bedroom with a cheap guitar and a worn stack of Cream records. Night after night, he dropped the needle on Crossroads, trying to capture every bend, every fiery lick that poured from Eric Clapton's Les Paul. He wasn't just listening. He was studying, obsessing, worshiping. Clapton wasn't just an influence. He was the reason Eddie picked up the guitar. Eddie later told Guitar World, "Clapton was my main influence. I used to sit there for hours trying to figure out what he was doing. I'd play that solo on Crossroads, note for note. He was God to me." In those early years, Eddie didn't care about fame or tone circuits or songwriting strategies. He just wanted to understand what made Clapton's playing feel alive, the phrasing, the sustain, the perfectly placed pauses. That DNA was baked into Eddie's very foundation. But time changes everything. By the late 1970s, Eddie Van Halen had done something even Clapton hadn't. He reinvented the electric guitar. When Eruption hit in 1978, it sounded like it came from another dimension entirely. Two-handed tapping, harmonic squeals, dive bombs that seemed to defy physics. Suddenly, this shy kid from Pasadena wasn't just good, he was the future of rock. But not everyone cheered. The old guard, musicians Eddie once idolized, listened with skepticism. In 1980, when Clapton was asked about Van Halen, his response stunned Eddie to his core. Clapton said, "He's very good technically, but I don't hear much soul." It was a casual remark, but it cut deep. For Eddie, it was heartbreaking. The man who had shaped his entire approach to the instrument now dismissed his music as mechanical. Years later, Eddie admitted, "It kind of broke my heart. I learned everything from him. I wasn't trying to outplay him, I was inspired by him. To hear that he didn't like what I was doing really got to me." Eddie never fired back. He never insulted Clapton in interviews. But friends say he quietly wrestled with the disappointment, how strange it felt to be rejected by the very hero who lit the fire inside him. Part of the tension came from philosophy. Clapton's guitar work was built on restraint, a blues-rooted style where tone and phrasing told the whole story. Eddie's was about freedom, distortion, feedback, fearless experimentation. In a sense, they represented 2 eras. Clapton, the sound of the 60s. Eddie, the sound of the future. Yet even through the pain, the admiration never faded. In 1995, Eddie admitted, "Clapton's tone on Crossroads, that's still untouchable. I don't care what anybody says. That's pure feeling. You can't fake that." The 2 men eventually met in Los Angeles in the mid-1980s. Eddie was hopeful, like a fan meeting his idol for the first time. Clapton was polite but distant. They talked about guitars, tone, and amps, but not about emotion. Afterwards, Eddie told a friend, "He's just a man. I think I love the myth more than the person." That moment changed him. It was when Eddie stopped seeing legends as gods and started seeing them as humans, brilliant but flawed. Later, when asked if Clapton's words still bothered him, Eddie laughed softly. "Nah, maybe he didn't get it. Maybe I didn't get him either. We're from different planets, man." After Eddie's passing in 2020, Clapton reportedly spoke warmly of him in private, calling him a true innovator. By then, Eddie had long made peace with it. In 2001, he told Guitar World, "If Clapton hadn't existed, neither would I. Whatever he thinks of me doesn't change that." Clapton painted with blues and shadows. Eddie splashed neon across the sky. 2 guitar gods. Different worlds, but linked forever. Number 5, Ritchie Blackmore. There are few things more nerve-wracking for a young guitarist than meeting a hero, especially when that hero is Ritchie Blackmore, the moody, unpredictable genius behind Deep Purple and Rainbow. For teenage Eddie Van Halen, Blackmore wasn't just another rock star. He was a prophet of tone. Eddie would study burn and highway star note for note, replaying them until his fingers bled. He admired the precision of Blackmore's solos, the bite of his distortion, and that haunting sense of drama that hung over every riff. To Eddie, Ritchie was one of the few players who could make a guitar sound truly alive. When Van Halen's debut album exploded in 1978, Eddie suddenly found himself standing alongside the men he'd grown up idolizing. He was no longer a kid with a Strat copy in his bedroom. He was a chart-topping guitarist rewriting the rules of rock. But the dream soured quickly when he finally met one of his gods. In a 1982 interview with Guitar Player, Eddie recalled the encounter. "He just stared at me. Wouldn't say hi, nothing. I was crushed. I thought, wow, I looked up to this guy my whole life, and he just blew me off." That silence hit harder than any insult. Eddie was disarmingly open, a guy who could talk gear and pick up wiring for hours, who jammed with anyone and laughed easily. What stayed with him about Ritchie was the chill, the blank stare, the total absence of connection. Years later, he mentioned it again. "People like Joe Perry and Ritchie Blackmore just gave me the shaft with their eyes. Wouldn't say hello. Wouldn't be nice. No, nothing. I'm not that way." Part of it was Blackmore's personality. He was famously difficult, even with his own bandmates. His mystique depended on distance. And when he was finally asked what he thought of Van Halen, his response was both a compliment and a jab. "He's a fine player, but I think he plays too many notes." Fans argued over that line for years. Was it jealousy? Old-school snobbery? In truth, it revealed a deeper philosophical divide. Blackmore's style was shaped by classical phrasing and restraint, every bend and vibrato deliberate. Eddie's was the opposite, fluid, explosive, and utterly unbound. Still, Eddie never turned that cold encounter into bitterness. In a 1995 Guitar World interview, he looked back with understanding. "I was probably just too sensitive back then. Maybe he was shy or didn't know what to say. But man, I worshipped that guy growing up. Still do." And over time, even Ritchie softened. In 2008, he told Classic Rock magazine, "Eddie Van Halen brought something new. I can't deny that. What he did with the whammy bar, the tapping, it was clever. He found his own voice." Recognition, the very thing Eddie had once hoped for. Number 4, Joe Perry. In 1978, Van Halen was the new thunderstorm rolling across rock's skyline, raw, electrifying, and impossible to ignore. The debut album had just begun to shake the airwaves. Eddie was barely 23, still the hungry kid from Pasadena, tearing through solos each night like his life depended on it. But behind the amps and flashing lights, something quietly stung him. The cold indifference of the men he'd grown up idolizing. Players like Joe Perry of Aerosmith. Eddie recalled it in a 1982 Guitar Player interview. "People like Joe Perry would just give me the shaft with their eyes. Wouldn't say hello. Wouldn't be nice. No, nothing. I'm not that way." Imagine being the young prodigy on the road, playing with everything you have, night after night, and when you finally bump into the heroes whose posters hung on your wall, they don't even look your way. No nod. No smile. Just that cold, unreadable stare. Eddie believed Perry and others saw him as a threat. He put bluntly, they wouldn't go out of their way to help anybody, 'cause they would feel threatened. It wasn't just bitterness. It was an honest read of the generational shift happening in the late 70s. Eddie's style, fluid, fearless, rooted in invention, had redrawn the map of electric guitar. The old guard was blues and swagger. The new one was speed, precision, and sonic experimentation. Perry came from a school built on riff-heavy grooves and raw attitude. His tone was thick, swampy, full of sleaze, the soundtrack of cigarette smoke and backstage chaos. Eddie's, by contrast, was lightning in stereo. To some veterans, it didn't feel like evolution. It felt like an invasion. Eddie never confronted Perry publicly, never lashed out. But he couldn't shake how strange it felt to be treated like an outsider by the very people who had inspired him. He wasn't asking for mentorship, just a handshake. A moment of shared respect. Instead, he walked away with quiet resolve. If they wouldn't open the door, he'd build a new one. Ironically, years later, Joe Perry would completely reverse his stance. In 2013, Perry looked back with open admiration. Eddie's playing was just phenomenal. He took everything that he'd heard and put his own stamp on it. "I thought, oh my God, this is great." He reinvented guitar playing. Perry described hearing Van Halen's debut for the first time, completely floored. "I was blown away. I kept going back to figure out those little tricks and things, the sound, the energy. It was just so different." That belated respect came too late to erase the sting of those early years. But it spoke volumes about Eddie's impact. Even those who once turned away eventually had to acknowledge what he had done, not just for rock, but for the guitar itself. Number 3. Tom Scholz. It was supposed to be just another sunny afternoon show in the late 70s, Van Halen and Boston sharing a bill, both riding the crest of America's new rock wave. Eddie had just finished his solo. Raw, fearless, dripping with adrenaline. The audience was still roaring when Tom Scholz stepped up and did the unthinkable. Eddie later recalled, "Tom Scholz from Boston too, we played right before them, I forget where, and I do my solo. And then all of a sudden, he does my solo. It was real weird because it was a daytime thing. I was standing on stage, and the whole crowd was looking at me like, what's this guy doing? I was drunk. I got pissed." Some fans thought Scholz was paying tribute. Others thought he was copying. To Eddie, it felt like theft, not of riffs, but of identity. That irritation grew sharper because Scholz wasn't exactly warm backstage. Eddie described him bluntly. He never comes around. He doesn't say hi, doesn't do anything. Just kind of hides out, runs on stage and plays, and disappears afterwards. The mix of imitation and aloofness stung. Eddie respected confidence, but silence read as arrogance. Tom Scholz, to be fair, wasn't trying to steal thunder. He was almost the opposite of Eddie in every way. A perfectionist engineer with an MIT master's degree in mechanical engineering who recorded Boston's debut album in his basement studio. He built his own gear, fine-tuned every frequency, and created the Rockman amp system that shaped arena rock's glossy tone. Where Eddie played by instinct, Scholz calibrated by science. Their worlds collided like oil and water. Eddie was chaos and feel, Scholz was structure and control. One lived for improvisation, the other trusted formulas. To Eddie, originality wasn't optional, it was sacred. He built his Frankenstrat by hand, soldering pickups, sawing bodies, blowing up amps until he found his voice. Seeing someone mirror, that sound felt like watching a stranger wear your face. There's a difference between inspiration and duplication, he told Guitar World years later. You can be inspired by someone's playing, that's how we all start, but if you don't evolve, you're just tracing someone else's shadow. Yet mutual respect eventually surfaced. In a rare Boston Globe interview, Scholz admitted he's got imagination. You can't teach that. And Eddie, decades later, returned the courtesy. The guy built half the stuff he used. That's cool. I respect anyone who gets their hands dirty. Two geniuses. Same passion. Different planets. Number 2, Rick Derringer. It's 1978. Van Halen is exploding. The debut album is out, the crowds are wild, and Eddie Van Halen's guitar is rewriting the rules of rock. Every night feels electric, like the sound of the future being born. Then comes the night Rick Derringer opens for them. Derringer's a veteran, a respected player with real history, someone Eddie grew up admiring. But what happens next shakes Eddie to his core. After the show, Eddie walks into the bar, still wired from the adrenaline. He finds Derringer and says, "Hey Rick, I grew up on your ass. How can you do this? I don't care if you use the technique, don't play my melody." His words carry 3 emotions at once: admiration, betrayal, and a demand for respect. He isn't angry that Derringer used tapping. He's angry that he copied his solo, note for note, melody for melody, in front of the same audience. Inspiration is one thing. Replication is another. The next night, Derringer does it again. Same notes, same phrasing, even closing his set with "You Really Got Me," a song Van Halen had already turned into a live anthem. Eddie's patience snaps. He tells Derringer straight, "If you're going to keep doing that, you ain't opening for us." And just like that, Derringer is off the tour. For Eddie, this wasn't ego. It was about identity. Van Halen was still carving its place in history, and Eddie's sound, the tapping, the tone, the volcanic energy, was the heart of it. Seeing it mimicked so bluntly, especially by someone he respected, felt like theft. Years later, he admitted, "It's fucked, you know, because I'd copied some of his chops way back then." The sting came not from imitation itself, but from watching a hero cross that line. Even in anger, Eddie handled it with rare composure. No public insults, no backstage fights. Just a quiet, firm boundary, drawn not out of arrogance, but out of pride. He'd worked too hard for his sound to let someone else wear it. Over the years, that fury softened into perspective. By the 90s, Eddie could laugh about it. It's funny now. But man, I was hot. I was a kid, and I'd worked so hard for that sound. And then you hear someone just rip it off on stage? You go, no way. Rick Derringer never denied the story, never admitted it either. When asked about Eddie later, he simply said, "He's a monster player. Nobody can touch him." Maybe that was his way of making peace. Eddie moved on, building new guitars, inventing new tones, chasing fresh ideas. But the Derringer story left him with one lasting truth: being great means being copied. And protecting originality isn't arrogance. It's survival. You can copy the licks, Eddie once said, but not the spirit. And that's what music is: spirit. Number 1. Randy Rhoads. In the early 1980s, two guitar prodigies stood at the center of rock's storm: Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads. Both were young. Both were revolutionizing guitar playing. And both were being endlessly compared. For Eddie, those comparisons cut deep. What began as admiration soon turned into rivalry, and perhaps quiet resentment. Eddie's feelings toward Rhoads weren't built on hatred alone. They were rooted in pride, competition, and the fear of being eclipsed. In archival audio captured for Randy Rhoads, Reflections of a Guitar Icon, Eddie's words were sharp, layered with honesty and defensiveness. He was one guitarist who was honest anyway. Because he said everything he did, he learned from me. He was good, but I don't really think he did anything that I haven't done. And there ain't nothing wrong with it. I've copied other people, you know? That's classic Eddie, part compliment, part challenge. He acknowledged Rhoads' talent, but immediately drew a line in the sand: you learn from me. It wasn't arrogance as much as it was Eddie reclaiming authorship of the guitar revolution he started. Tapping, dive bombs, harmonic squeals, all the techniques that defined 80s guitar were suddenly everywhere. And some of those echoes were coming from Randy's fingertips. Rhoads had come from a very different world. Classically trained, disciplined, almost studious in his approach to music. Where Eddie was instinct and fire, Randy was precision and form. Together, they represented the two poles of modern guitar: chaos and control. And fans couldn't resist comparing them. Ozzy Osbourne, who worked closely with Randy, later pushed back on Eddie's claims. I heard recently that Eddie said he taught Randy all his licks. He never. To be honest, Randy didn't have a nice thing to say about Eddie. Maybe they had a falling out or whatever, but they were rivals. Rivals. That word captures it perfectly. This was an open war. It was cold competition. Both knew the other was brilliant. Both knew comparisons were inevitable. And in a scene fueled by ego, identity, and innovation, neither wanted to be seen as second best.